So welcome to another episode of Coaching Outdoors, and we are going international once again. We have Lennie Noiles from across the pond, who is an amazing coach who works outdoors. And just before we kind of kickstart into everything, I really want to kind of highlight the mission that Alex and I are on with this. And part of it is connecting people. And what is just a really lovely example of how we can do this is the fact that Lennie caught up with one of our other guests, Christiana. And this is what it's all about. It's about making connections, about sharing knowledge. And the fact that they were able to meet in person and have conversations around their passion is ultimately, what it is all about. So welcome. We are absolutely delighted to have you on here. It would be great if you could just introduce yourself and, who are you?
Well, so you introduced me. I'm Lennie, right? And I am across the pond, although no oceanfront for us. I'm in Denver, Colorado, or just outside Denver, at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. And I, like you say, I am a leadership coach, and I do traditional leadership coaching, but my specialty is actually doing nature-based leadership coaching. I have a program called The Nature of Leadership, where I actually take executives out of the confines of their office, and we go for walks in the woods, where I hand over the role of coaching to nature. My philosophy is we walk, you talk, I listen, and the world changes.
Oh, I just love that. It just really encapsulates so much of what we do and what we've heard from our other guests as well, and also from our followers and our listeners. That just really kind of hugely summarizes the wonderful opportunity that outdoor coaching gives us. We have a question that we asked all of our podcast guests, because we genuinely are so interested to find out why people have ended up as outdoor coaches. And the first question really is, what's your earliest memory of being outdoors? So think about way back when. What was your earliest memory, and how did you and why do you enjoy the outdoors so much?
So I'm going to cheat this question because to answer it, I'm going to answer with what I'm going to call it an implanted memory. I don't remember the specifics of this, but I've been told the story by my relatives so many times that it's become part of my story. And the story goes like this. When I was a toddler, we were at a family gathering, and apparently I had disappeared and no one could find me. And they were frantically looking for me throughout the neighborhood, called the police. I was just nowhere to be found. And they were, they didn't know if I was abducted. They didn't know, if I had, where I had wandered off to. But after a considerable amount of time, somebody spotted me emerging from the forest. I came walking out of the woods behind the house we were at. And as soon as the relief had died down, I was scolded very abruptly, right? Telling me that you cannot wander off into the woods alone. And I was apparently very confused. And my response was, I wasn't alone. I was with Major. Major was the neighbor's dog. So this is my first experience with nature, right? And I don't remember the specifics, but I'm sure that what called me to go into the woods, to walk into the woods with the dog, was the same calling that I hear throughout my life and still today, right? To come visit, come be with us. So there's my first experience with nature, my implanted memory.
And I love how we have sometimes these implanted memories of actually our recollection of it, that we've kind of created this vision, and then we own it and it becomes a part of us, and actually that narrative becomes living memory. And it would just be really interesting to know how you've gone from being that toddler with nature, exploring in the woods, to then, fast forward to your work now with clients, and ultimately kind of joining those two parts and really kind of creating the thread as to your coaching backstory.
Yeah, it's like a series of switchbacks. My story of how I got here today. And I would say that calling continued throughout my life, but there was a point when I was a teenager in the mid 70s that I had seen a documentary on the public broadcasting service that followed a group of juvenile delinquents that they had brought together from a variety of different cities around the country. And they brought them all to Colorado and followed their progress through an outward bound program that concluded with them summiting a mountain in South America. The documentary just hit me. I was always on the verge of being a juvenile delinquent myself, so there was that part of it. But that the possibility to work with these people, right, to work with young adults, at-risk people in a natural environment, stuck with me, and it kind of set my path for, this is, I think, what I want to do with my life. So when eventually I graduated from high school, within a year after that, I packed up my car and I moved to Colorado because I was going to pursue that dream. I was going to go get trained on how to be an outdoor instructor, and then go to school for psychology, and with the intent of working with at-risk youths in an outdoor environment. Well, that dream kind of got lost as life happened, right? I needed to pay the bills, so I got different jobs and worked in different industries, and that dream just kind of faded away into the fog for quite some time. But the call for nature was always there. I kept returning, kept going back, and I lived in Colorado now. Right? The mountains were in my backyard, so I was always going off. And a lot of time had passed, a good couple of decades almost, and I discovered coaching. I was given the title of coach in one of my jobs. And I was like, well, I need to learn what this thing is. And as I started studying coaching and learning about, it's like, oh, this is something I've been doing all my life. It's like, this is really, it's got a draw for me. And I ended up making coaching my career. And so I was like most people, when they get into coaching, they do the traditional coaching in office setting. And I was doing that. And then one day, just out of the luck of the draw, we couldn't, my client and I couldn't find a room to be in. So we went for a walk around the building. And during that walk, it was like a flashback, right, that you see in a movie, right? It's like I had all of the memories of why I came to Colorado to begin with. It's like, it is possible to do this work outside. And so from there, I started experimenting. I would invite other clients to, hey, let's go for a walk around the building. And then those walks became, hey, let's go down the street to the park. And we would walk around the park. And I'm seeing that this is really a possibility. And when I started applying then that thought to, can I do this in the outdoors? I started inviting a couple of clients to go on a hike. Would you just be willing to go for a hike? We'll try to do some coaching and, just see what happens. And a couple of people were willing to experiment with me. And the response that I got from these clients was that the work that we had just done in nature was exponentially more powerful than the work that we were doing sitting in a traditional office setting. So that was my venture of how I got here today.
It's so wonderful to hear you sort of describe how you had an intention and for whatever reason, you said life turned in different ways, but you've come back to it, and that pull, that call from nature is obviously so strong that you found your way to working in the natural environment eventually, even if it wasn't necessarily part of the original as the original plan was mapped out. And just experimenting as well. We've had a lot of people messaging us asking, how do I get started? And we often encourage them, just try it out. Find somebody who might be willing to give it a go with you, or maybe if you're on a coach training course, go outside whilst you're practicing any of the sessions or any of the tools and techniques, and just having somebody who's willing to help you and try it out. I think it's wonderful to have that support as well, both from your clients as well. So, but like you said, it's hugely beneficial for them as well. So hopefully they get that at the end too. So it would be lovely to actually find out a bit more from you about what nature-based coaching actually means for you and how it's shaped your practice, both with your, your leadership teams. You mentioned at the start of the podcast, you take leaders out and about coaching. So what does that nature-based coaching actually mean for you? How do you bring it into your practice?
Yeah. So I view nature-based coaching a little bit different than coaching in nature. Right there are coaches, and this is where I started. Right, it's needed. It's a great thing to do. Is just by taking clients out into nature and then inflicting coaching on them. And for some people, this is exactly the path that they need to follow. But as I did that more and more and more, I found that to truly become a nature-based coach, as opposed to someone who coaches in nature, requires forming a partnership, and it's the co-creation of the experience that involves the coach, the client, and nature itself. And those three entities become equal partners in the creation of that experience. I always like to view nature-based coaching kind of falls in that sweet spot between the contemplative practice of forest bathing and the adrenaline-filled practice of wilderness or adventure therapy. Right? It's a little bit of both, but it's not really either. And nature becomes the coach in this situation. I look at when I walk into nature with a client, I'm very clear, I'm going to let go of the role of coaching, let nature become the coach. My role then becomes the accompagnator. Right? I'm the one who walks with. I'm going to hold space so that you, the client, can discover your own path on this journey.
And this relationship that we have with nature, with ourselves as a coach, with our coachee, it's just such a really interesting and complex and multi-layered phenomena, and how it evolves in our work as coaches as well, as we start on our journey, and then how we mature and how we almost gain confidence in it as well. I know for me, when I started, I was very much like a walk and talk. That was almost like, it was acceptable. The corporate world kind of get it to a certain degree. You can very much link on the well-being. And it has taken time for me to go on my own journey. And, for example, I was on a soulful connection with trees at Schumacher College course, and actually having that different level of connection, that kind of energetic connection. So I'm like pushing my boundaries, I'm stretching myself, and then actually how does that kind of come back and inform my practice? So there's just such a broad way within this kind of coaching outdoors niche, or for want of a better word, how do you characterize it? Let's be honest, how do we really put a label on it? So just to kind of take a step sideways and think about the stunning nature that you have on your doorstep. I mean, wow, come on, Colorado. It doesn't exactly get much better than that. As much as I love my part of Wiltshire in southwest England, and I'll admit, Butte, where Alex is stood in front of at the moment, is gorgeous. Have been up to visit her over the summer. But the mountains of Colorado, oh my God, you've stolen my heart. I want to go there. I want to hit up the trails. So it would just be really interesting just to kind of dive into, okay, so you've got this phenomenal kind of scenery, nature. How do you then bring that in to your coaching? How do the different parts of nature really support, the client's agenda or the challenges and like what they want out of the coaching?
Yeah, so that's a multifaceted question there. So I put on my consultant hat, right? And it's like, it depends, right? It's contextually dependent. But so with my clients, before I take them into nature, a lot of times we do a little pre-walk, a shorter, hour or two long journey around a local, right? Just to kind of get a feel for what it is that they are working on. And we have that conversation of, why they're pursuing coaching, and more specifically, why they think a nature-based approach might be what they're looking for. And there are some clients who tell me, I heard you were a hiking guide. And it's like, okay, now let's level set, because that's not what I do, right? I am not a hiking guide. I'm not qualified to do that. I'm happy to go on a hike with you, right? But what I do is nature-based coaching, and we have a different conversation. There are some clients who come to me for traditional coaching, and intuitively it feels like they might benefit from a nature-based experience. So I open up that conversation, and I go to some of the reasons why it might be a better experience. When we look at what happens when we leave the confines of our office, that the freedom that gives us, right? What happens when we're out in a new environment that offers us new perspectives? And then if they're open to that, then we pursue, here's what this would look like. It's really contextual, depending on what the client is looking for, how I bring them, how I approach that, bringing them into a natural environment.
Anna Marie and I often talk about the sort of identity element of it, and how we as coaches identify with nature, and how our clients identify with nature, and how we can marry the two together. And it would be great if you could just reflect a little bit more on that, even, what's your identity with nature, and how do you discover what your client's identity with nature is as well?
Yeah. I think like all of us, right? Our identity with anything is constantly evolving. My identity with nature is certainly evolving. It comes from whether I just sit in my backyard in a little sit spot and amongst the sunflowers and watch the bees and the hummingbirds, enjoy that. It changes my perception of my being human, separate than nature, as to my being a human being, part of this system of nature. And so my evolution in my relationship with nature is constantly growing to become more relational, more part of acknowledging that I am a piece of a much larger system. Now with clients, if I'm working with an executive leader, I can't say, hey, let's go out into the woods and hug trees, right? That's not going to get me very far. But I can say, right, you live here in Colorado. You're flying into Colorado for a reason, and that reason is to have an experience. And there's the potential that you can reconnect with a part of yourself that you may have lost, and it's that possibility is what I'm offering, that nature might be able to provide them. I'm not making any promises. I'm not telling them that they're going to make a connection, that they're all of a sudden they're going to, become the long hair leaping gnome that's going to be running around naked in nature, right? That's not what I do, but I offer them possibility. And then it's up to them how they want to pursue that.
It sounds wonderful. And I think, mine and Anna Marie's experience of outdoor coaching here in the UK, and Anna Marie's coached all over the world as well. And everybody has that different experience. So your experience in Denver is amazing, and a little bit different to even Christiana's and other people. We have a couple of guests from the States as well. We've got a lovely lady called Jen who we're interviewing as well. And everyone's experience is a bit different, and it is very much based on what your surroundings are like, and where you go for that outdoor coaching experience, and how you connect. And just transitioning now slightly away from kind of the kind of your experience and your sort of coaching environment. You and I have exchanged a couple of messages over the last couple of months around the research side of things, and we've mentioned it a couple of times in other podcasts as well. And I know you're very, very interested in evidence-based research around, okay, so we experience outdoor coaching, we know it's great, our clients know it's great, but what's the research that out there, what is out there to help us understand why it's happening, and what is happening? So what do you believe, and what have you experienced as the benefits of coaching, and what research have you found that really supports that the experiences we're having?
So I kind of did this backwards, right? So I started doing it, and then I began looking for the research to validate what my experiences were and what my clients were saying. I didn't have the background to be able to say, oh, this is why that's happening. And so I now have a file on my computer that has hundreds of research papers, whether it's how when we walk on uneven environments, it impacts the shifting in the brain of how our modalities work, the biomechanics of our body and what that does to our brain, or just walking in general, how that simulates what they use in psychotherapy with EMDR, right? Eye movement desensitization, right? That walking is a natural phenomena of that allows us to access parts of the brain that we don't have access to when we're just sitting there. Then there's research on the benefits of being in nature from a health perspective, right? That the specifically fir trees, pine trees, evergreen trees emit phenocides that help boost our immune system. And so when I look at the research that I have, all of the research says, oh, this is great and wonderful. I laugh at the research because all these research papers, there's always a section at the end of it that says, do you have any conflicts of interest in your research? And everybody always says no, but nobody admits to the confirmation bias that they're going into this research with, right? It's like, well, is your research falsifiable? But the larger thing that I notice with all this research is it's very narrow focused. Each researcher has gone deep into one specific element of the walking or being in nature or the impact of one aspect. And nobody that I've seen, maybe on the outskirts, just a couple of people, but there's nobody that's really taking that body of research and looking at it from a holistic perspective. So for example, what happens as I'm walking in nature, breathing these phenocides that are boosting my immune system and actually altering the makeup of my brain, and each step is giving me a little bit of extra pump, and that's pumping more of these phenocides and a little bit more oxygen from the activity that I'm having into the brain, along with the being in nature out of context and the experience with coming there with some intent. What happens when I put that all into a holistic perspective? What's going on then? What's possible from there? And so all the little fragments of research are great. They've given me validation when someone asks me, oh, so what's good about that? And I can list the different pieces. But I would love to see research that puts this all together from a holistic perspective and looks at the both the macro and the micro impact on the coach, on the coachee, and the experience.
I love this.
That was a mouthful.
Yeah, multiples are always good. Sometimes boiling it down to like a single point, you're like, actually, does it really offer enough? And I think what is super clear there is actually this call to action. Actually, more research is needed. Yes, in the discrete different areas, and bringing everything together, kind of pulling everything together. So yeah, listeners, get on board. Like, okay, let's use this.
Do some research.
This is like the collective, the power of the collective. Alone we are but one, together we are many. And actually the power of what we can do as a community is phenomenal. So if research is your thing and you love making sure that actually it's robust, the way that you're setting it up really kind of is very inclusive and really diverse. The sample size of it is sufficient, and it's not just looking at a very kind of bland small group with this conservation bias, for example. A lot of psychological studies I think are done on psychology students, for example. Let's get a little bit more kind of breadth and depth to it all. I will hands up admit I'm a practitioner. I'm firmly in the practitioner camp. A little bit of research is needed. It needs to be there to back things up. And for some people, it's the convincer, it's the persuader. What is the evidence? What does the research say? And actually, let's give them the evidence. Let's give them the research. It's about getting the practitioners joining forces, and then yes, getting the academic side on board as well. So there's lots and lots and lots of work to be done. So Yeah, reach out.
Anna Marie, if I could just add to that, right? So with the research, right? So the most of the research I've seen, in fact, all of the research that I've seen looks at the very tangible data points. What happens when we look at the non-tangible? So let me give you an example. When I was taking clients into nature, right, coaching in nature as opposed to doing nature-based coaching, I had an experience where my client came to me because they were struggling with their leadership skill set. They were told constantly that they're not aware of their surrounding. They're spending too much time in their head. So we went for a walk in a nature preserve that bordered a reservoir. And there were plenty of opportunities for me to point out, hey, in this situation, what are you observing? And the client would make a couple of statements and then go immediately back into the headspace. And this went on and on and on as we're walking around. And finally, I said to myself, I'm working way too hard as a coach trying to help this person solve their problem. What happens when I step back and just hold space and listen? And as we were doing that, we came up over an embankment and he's still talking away. And I stopped him and I says, what do you think these deer have to say about this experience that you're having? And he all of a sudden stopped and looked around, awestruck, and realized that we were standing in the middle of a small herd of deer that he was totally oblivious to. And right then in that moment, it clicked with him that what people were telling him was true. And so this was a few years ago. And occasionally when I run into him, he tells me to this day, he still uses that example of having that realization. So now when he feels like he's not paying attention, he asks himself that question: what would the deer say right now? And it has changed the way that he leads because it's allowed him to be more in tune what's going on. And so how do you measure that, right? What kind of research is going to go there? Because you can't measure, right, hormones in the blood, right? Cortisol and et cetera, right? How do you measure the intangible? That's what I would love to see somebody do a study on.
Me too.
That sounds amazing. You're saying about deer as well. I'm Highlands of Scotland. It's autumn, so the deers have started their rut, and they're all in the background over on Butte. And I'm sitting here listening to you talking, and you mentioned deer, and all I can hear on the hills behind me are the deers roaring at each other and the odd clatter of antlers. It's amazing. It's very, very natural, very raw nature. So, but yes, absolutely. I think that's such a wonderful example there. Thank you for sharing that.
And our listeners always really love that tangible example of almost being like the fly on the wall within the coaching conversation, because that's what we don't really get to see. As coaches, our work is, by nature, inherently private. So actually having these nuggets that people can really get hold of, it really helps them contextualize things. So thank you so much for sharing that. And in your journey, in your learnings, it would be really helpful if you're able to maybe signpost some resources that have been particularly useful to you in your growth. Our listeners are always asking for knowledge. They're thirsty for knowledge. So it'd be helpful if you could just maybe share like a couple of key texts or resources that you have found helpful.
Yeah, so I found that recently I've been reading a lot of not just studies, but actually books on ecopsychology. And I'm really bad with names here, so I'm going to Andy, I want to say Fishner has Radical Ecopsychology, which I thought I just started reading this book here, and what the paradox he talks about in the very first chapter, I think, is really important for the work that we do as coaches. And so I'm not going to give away the gist of it here, but that would be one of my recommendations. And then Catherine Allen has a book. Something about the roots, but it's really oh, I'm gonna have to send the title of the book to you. It's really good from a business perspective, not from a business perspective, but from an executive coaching perspective. It kind of takes the concept of biophilia, right? What are the metaphors in nature that help business leaders explore, what would nature do in this situation? How might we learn from those lessons and take those into the work that we're doing in our businesses? So those are a couple that are really good. But the biggest thing I want to say, right, and it goes back to, the fault behind research, right? It's like, playing a game of football, right? You're not going to know what all the books and all the papers that you read, you're not going to know really what it's like until you go out there and get on the field and start kicking the ball around. Right? It's get out there and do it, right? Go out there and experiment. Find some people that you feel psychologically safe with and try things that you were maybe intimidated to try before. And it's through those experiences, maybe you'll become the next person that writes the great book or the great article that helps the rest of the industry move forward.
Mm. And it's just a lovely way to end our podcast today. Honestly, Lennie, we could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. And I know you shared with us before this, your breadth and range of thoughts and ideas and the things that you do and the connections between your thoughts and your experiences. So we'd love to have you back on the podcast maybe next year, just to pick your brains about some other topics and some other things. Just your wealth of experience is wonderful, and I know our listeners will really appreciate just learning more from you, because I just listening to you today, I've learned so much. And we just Anna Marie and I are like sponges. We just loved. We always say this is our passion project, but also we always say we feel a little bit kind of selfish, really, because we're learning so much personally. We get to share this with people as well, but just being able to sit and have a chat with you and record it is wonderful for us. So just to summarize today, thank you so much for sharing your backstory, how you've managed to find your way to outdoor coaching, which is, again, very different to all of our other guests. And that's part of the beauty of outdoor coaching. Everybody comes to it from a different place, and it's so varied and so wide ranging in that way. And just your experiences with yourself as, the nature-based coaching, as opposed to coaching in nature, that co-partnering with yourself, your client, and nature. And I love the description you said at the very start as well about how you encompass nature into your coaching practice. And we just said there, the call to arms about research. I'm a research-based person, and Marisa, she's a practitioner through very much with the research, loving the research. I come from the research side and love the practical side as well. So call to arms to everybody listening. If there's anybody out there who really wants to get involved, think about some research and think about how you can sort of add to the wealth of knowledge that's out there. But then, just before we go, can you share with everybody where people can find you? I'm sure people will want to connect after this. So how's the best way for people to come across you and find you?
Yeah, so if you spell my name properly, so it's LennieNoiles. You can find me on LinkedIn. And if you put a .com after that, you can find my website. Right? So lennienoiles.com. And more specifically, if you get to my website, go look at the page that says The Nature of Leadership. And you'll get a really good understanding of what I do. And then in the blog section of my post, I just wrote a blurb about my description of what is nature-based leadership. So if you do some exploring around my site, you'll be able to find me. And thank you so much. I'm honored to be amongst you. I think the work you're doing is so needed, and I'm grateful for it.
Oh, thank you, Lennie, and thank you for being willing to be our guest. I know we've been speaking over the summer, and it's just wonderful that we've been able to connect, and we've had you on as a wonderful guest. So thank you so much, and we look forward to sharing this with our listeners. Thank you.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard, like it, share across your network,
and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks so much in advance for your support.